Hello mountain bike friends! This video is going to be your guide to everything mountain bike handlebars and, well, what we'd like to call a buyer's guide. We are going to cover everything from materials, rise and sweep, width, diameter / compliance and stiffness, common rider preferences including my own, and really just everything you need to know about a handlebar. Materials, well, that's kind of just carbon and aluminum. Yes, there is titanium bars, but they are extremely rare and in a very odd class of their own. So, if you're buying mountain bike bars, you're wondering carbon versus aluminum. There are some major differences. Price and weight. Like a lot of things in the mountain bike world, alloy is going to be much cheaper and quite a bit heavier than carbon handlebars, which are much more expensive and a lot lighter. So if you're concerned about either of those things, then this topic's probably over. But if you're also wondering, is there more than just price and weight? There kind of is. Carbon bars, because they're just manufactured and designed differently, they can do a lot more unique things with the compliance and the stiffness and sort of how they feel and the damping that the bar has. So do you get a nicer ride quality and feel out of a carbon bar? Yes, absolutely. Is it much lighter? Yes, absolutely. Is that worth the price? That's up to you. But you typically see carbon handlebars around $125 and up, and you typically see aluminum mountain bike handlebars around $50 to $75. So there you go. That's materials. Rise and sweep. To touch on rise, we actually made a whole video about why higher rise mountain bike bars are becoming more popular. In that video, I broke down the various different types of bikes and why you would want a lower rise bar versus a higher rise bar, and then why higher rise bars such as this have been becoming more popular than lower rise bars such as this. Part of that does have to do with the bike that it goes on, but it's also what you're going for. And there is a lot of reasons why people are going to higher rise bars. The most common that you're gonna see on trail / enduro, just general modern mountain bikes, is about a 20-25 millimeter rise bar. That's the most common. You lean more towards cross country when you're concerned about lowering your body position and aerodynamics. You might see 10 millimeter rise or even flat bars. You go towards wanting to be more upright on an enduro bike, downhill bike, or even a dirt jump bike, or just wanting to lift your, chest off of the bars more for different handling. You might see 35 mil to 45 mil rise bars. So check out that video if you want to dig more into rise, but most common is 20-25 mil. When it comes to sweep, you basically have your back sweep and your up sweep. And 8 degrees back and 5 degrees up is the most common. Almost every bar you're gonna see out there has that. Some will have a 9 and a 4 or a 9 and a 5, but 8 and 5 are the most common, and that's kind of what I feel like everyone's sort of settled on for the most part. It's what I prefer myself. It's what I think every person in our entire company rides. And oddly enough, things like back sweep and up sweep, once you get used to a certain kind, 8 and 5, it feels really weird to change, because then all of a sudden your elbows are in a different position and your wrists are in a different position, and it really changes the feel of the bike. So once you get used to 8 and 5, you probably just want to stick to it, and odds are you already have 8 and 5 on your bike right now. So that is rise, back sweep, and up sweep. How wide should your bars be? This is a topic that we made an entire video on, I think 3 years ago. And although that's an old video, I think the information is still really good and valid. A lot of people have covered this topic, and bar width is something that mountain bikes evolved with very small, tiny bars because they thought that made sense for some reason for aerodynamics. I have no idea why. You can see a lot of old videos and old riders on these bikes from the 80s and 90s with these tiny handlebars. Then motocross sort of mixed in with mountain biking more, and bars got a lot wider, and people realized that a wider bar, shorter stem gave you a lot more control, especially at speed and in rough terrain, and people started experimenting with wider bars and realized it was a great addition and upgrade, and now they're kind of commonplace for the most part. And when I say wide bars, I'm pretty much saying 740 to 800. That's, you know, basically that wider-ish mountain bike range. Part of it is personal preference. Part of it is body size. Depending on how wide and broad your shoulders are is going to make a difference what feels comfortable for you. If you're weaving in between trees all the time when you ride, or if you're riding out in the high desert and there's no trees and it's very high speed, that's going to play into that factor. But watch that video on bar width if you're really worried about that. Most handlebars you can cut quite a bit, carbon or aluminum, so you can buy an 800 mil wide bar and you can trim it all the way down to 760 or 740 most of the time. Sometimes they say there's a limit on that, so pay attention to that. My personal preference is 760, which is what I have on my own bike, but we'll get more into preferences later. Width is a bit of a preference. Watch that video if you're curious, but 760, 780, those are like the most common widths that you're going to see on everyday trail, enduro, all mountain bikes. Diameter, also known as girth, or the bar clamp diameter for your stem, is basically either 31.8 or 35 millimeter. Neither. 35 is kind of new. They made that a handful of years ago for various reasons about making the bars lighter and stiffer and giving them more ability to weave carbon in different ways. 31.8 is still really hung on. And then there's sort of these, I won't call them conspiracies, about 31.8 bars having more compliance and flex, which some people think is a good thing, some people think is a bad thing. You can go down the rabbit hole on 31.8 versus 35. But if you look at a company, this is a very new thing, right? So 31.8 or 35, those are your two most common diameters. 35 more so on the higher end stuff. OneUp Components. We made an entire video about their handlebars, which is what I have on my bike right now. They were, I think, the first people to ever re-engineer the handlebar to have compliance, and specifically, right? So their whole idea was vertical compliance, meaning the bar actually does have some flex this way, but not this way. So it doesn't have flex when you steer it. So some people were saying, hey, 35 millimeter bars, and those bars are just too stiff in general, so it's just giving me fatigue in my hands, and so I want to ride a 31.8 bar or even an aluminum bar because it has more flex to it than a certain carbon bar would. But then it has, flex laterally, which you don't want. You don't want to be trying to steer in rough terrain and having the bars flex this way. You only kind of want it this way. So OneUp engineered, and I believe patented, is strange design shape right here on their handlebar that does give it that vertical compliance or flex and lateral stiffness. It's a very good and interesting idea, and we made a whole YouTube video comparing it back to back with all these other bars, and I was shocked at the results. Check that video out if you're curious. But this does boil back down to carbon versus aluminum. Aluminum, you can't really do things like that, whereas carbon, you can ride 5 different carbon bars and they all might have a very different feel in terms of being really stiff or compliant. And again, there is some preference there, right? Like the more of a bike nerd you are and the more handlebars you've tried, you might actually want a really stiff bar because you're just interested in that feeling, and it might feel really good and efficient when you're, really on the pedals and powering down. Could be more important for an XC rider, whereas if you're a downhill rider or enduro and you're hitting bumps all the time, you might want that vertical compliance that something like the OneUp bars will give you. So that's materials. OneUp is really the only brand that's doing anything unique there. Is it extremely relevant and meaningful? It's very personal preference. If you're trying to solve a problem like you're getting arm fatigue or wrist fatigue or whatever pain in your hands, then yeah, that could be a really good benefit to your ride. If you're not experiencing that, then maybe it's not a big deal. But that's diameter and that's sort of compliance and stiffness. Yeah, there you go. Common rider preferences, including my own. So I think I kind of already touched on that, but common rider preferences, 8 and 5 in terms of back sweep and up sweep is very common. Diameter, it's hit or miss. I don't think anyone really cares too much about that. I think most people on the higher end spectrum, meaning bikes over $3,000, are all using 35 millimeter clamp bars. Below that, 31.8 still very much common and accepted. Preferences on width definitely go all over the place. I think most common is probably 780. If I were to try and throw a nail at the specific size that most mountain bikers would like, I would pick 780. I personally like 760, but I think the majority of our staff and mountain biker friends of mine, most of them are running 780. Some of the bigger guys or the downhill focus guys might be running 800. Some of the more XC guys might be running 740s, and some of the more trail riders like myself might be running 760. But those are kind of your common widths and preferences. And again, remember, you can cut handlebars, and most of them are sold to be cut. Like most bars are sold at 800 with the assumption they're going to be cut down somewhere between 740 and 800. So that's a common thing. So don't go scouring looking for a 760 bar. It might not exist. You might need to buy that bar in an 800, and they might have made it in 800 to basically please people who like 800, 780, 760, etc. So that's kind of preferences. Again, I like the OneUp bars. I like the compliance. And again, 760 for me. Rise on this particular bike, I'm running a 25 mil rise bar. I think that's, again, the most common that people are doing. Higher rise bars, watch that video if you're curious. If you have lower back pain, if you feel like you want to be more upright when you're riding, if you want it to be easier to lift up that front end, that's when you should start considering higher rise handlebars. All of this information and more is in an article linked below in the video description, where we also talk about our top 5 carbon bars and aluminum bars, our favorite picks of just good brands, good models from reliable brands. So check that out. Thank you very much for watching. Please hit that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed, and we will see you guys in the next video. Cheerio.
What did you just say, Bill?